Welcome to How Many Tries, a content free time show where we look at 3D models in video games. Today we're going to be taking a look at Spider-Man. The first model we're looking at today is the Spider-Man model from the Nintendo 64 Spider-Man game. I'm not sure if this is the exact same model they used in the PlayStation 1 version of the game, but I couldn't find a rip of the PS1 version online, so I'm gonna go ahead and assume it's the same. Spider-Man's very first 3D model in a video game was 524 triangles. Not too shabby, I think it looks pretty good for a PlayStation 1 and 64 game. It definitely shows its age a bit more when you turn off the textures, but with the textures on, I think it looks pretty good. It really captures that comic book feel with the really dark, almost black shadows on him. His head maybe looks a little long, but I think the rest of his body proportions look pretty good. Very solid first attempt. Just 1 year later, in 2001, we were treated to Spider-Man in Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 for the Xbox. Already, this looks so good. Much better than the N64 and PlayStation 1 version. And the polygon count really backs that up. We went from just over 500 tries to 3,312. That is a huge jump. We got like 6 times the triangle count just 1 year later. Even with the textures off, look at how good that looks. I feel like you could put the textures of like any random dude on here and it would look good. And with the textures, it looks even better. You can see on the first model, you couldn't really make out any of his webbing or anything like that, but you can on this model. You can see each individual little section of web. Interestingly, his little spider logo shrunk quite a bit. I want to say the original comic book version kind of looked like something in between these two. I think it was this shape, but maybe this size? We've got Spider-Man the movie, the game. Did I say this model looked good? Look at how good this model looks. With like 1,000 less tries. This one's only 2,100 tries. And you can't even really tell when the textures are turned off. But for the time, I'd say this looks fantastic. I wonder if those extra 1,000 tries are just in the skateboard. No, I guess according to this, the skateboard's only 376 tries. And the textures on this thing, man, already, even in the Xbox, GameCube, and PS2 era, look at how detailed these textures were. The pattern's not super sophisticated necessarily, it's mostly just a bunch of dots with a swayy black grid on top of it. He's even got some cool shading on his eyes now compared to that white blob he had before. We're only 3 games in and we might have already peaked. Okay, looking at this next one, no, I was wrong. The Spider-Man 2 movie model is clearly much better. He's got a stronger pose, he's not slouching like this guy was. Look at this guy back here. Now this guy looks like the virgin Spider-Man 1 Spider-Man, and this is like the Chad Spider-Man 2 Spider-Man. He's got much brighter coloring, his spider logo pops more, his eyes look a lot more well-defined. When you zoom in though, it does look like the textures on the Spider-Man 1 model may have been a slightly higher resolution. That might be because I was looking at the console versions instead of the PC version. I'm not sure, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but interesting nonetheless. I do think I like this model better, but I could also see why people would like the Spider-Man 1 model better. The dark coloring is kind of cool, I just think he looks a little better with the bright red and blue. Next we've got Spider-Man from Marvel Nemesis, Rise of the Imperfects. I'd never even heard about this game until doing research for this video. Released in 2005, I guess it's a fighting game for the PS2, Xbox, GameCube, Nintendo DS, and PSP. This must be the console version rather than the portable version. 4,000 triangles, pretty decent upgrade in the polygon department. That Spider-Man 2 model was under 2,000 tries. This game clearly had a different art style. It looks like they were going for a darker, more mature look. The colors are a lot more washed out. I imagine this probably looked pretty good in the context of that game. Compared to these other Spider-Men, the design is cool, but I prefer the brighter colors. Next up is Ultimate Spider-Man, released in 2005. Definitely a lot more cartoony than the previous models. His head and his eyes are a lot bigger compared to his body. Funny how he's got a pretty big slouch to his neck. That doesn't look great. Looks like he's got some scoliosis going on there. The coloring's kind of neat. I do like the bright colors, but aside from that, it's not my favorite model. Wow, huge jump in triangle count though. 7,496 triangles. I would not have guessed that. I would have thought that was lower than those previous models. I guess he does look quite a bit rounder, so I can see where they used those triangles, but I don't think it was quite necessary. Or was it? Marvel Ultimate Alliance, released in 2006. I hear this is another fan favorite, along with the Spider-Man 2 game from earlier. Spider-Man 2 was one of my favorites. Haven't played Ultimate Alliance, but this model looks pretty good. Huge jump down in triangle count. We went from almost 7,500 triangles to 944. I'm pretty sure there were a bunch of playable characters in Ultimate Alliance, so I can see why they'd have to lower that triangle count, but you wouldn't think they'd have to lower it that much. I don't know, I guess it doesn't make a huge difference. If the game's good enough, graphics don't really matter all that much, but I feel like this model could have benefited from just a few more polygons. Coloring's good though. Let's take a quick break from the console games here to look at the portable games for a sec. This is from the Nintendo DS version of Spider-Man Web of Shadows, released in 2008. For a DS game, looks pretty good, pretty cartoony, but I wouldn't really expect anything less than that. It's kind of funny how beefy his forearms are. I feel like that's kind of unnecessary. Most of these other Spider-Man models had all of the muscles in the biceps. Also, the coloring seems a little washed out. Not sure if that's because of the limitations of the DS, or maybe that's just the art style of the game. This model is 480 triangles. Compared to that N64 model we started with, that was 524 triangles. I feel like that model looked quite a bit better. In comparison, this almost doesn't even look like Spider-Man. Kind of looks more like Deadpool or something. It's not terrible though. That is until you compare it to the Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions model, also released on the Nintendo DS. This game was released in 2008, a couple years later, so they did have a couple years to improve the model a bit, and I think that really shows. This one's more on par with the N64 model at 518 triangles. Not only that, but the textures look way better than that last DS model. The eyes have way more shape to them, they're not just round blobs. You can actually tell this is a spider now. This almost looked like one of those mech suits from Final Fantasy VI. I never played this game, so I don't know how much he uses this wingsuit thing, but that looks pretty cool. Also, the dark blue here looks much better than this, like, teal-y turquoise color from before. Next up is the PC version of Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions. These models are getting really good. This one is just over 8,000 triangles. Looks good in color, looks good with the textures turned off. One thing that's interesting with a lot of these models is you can't really tell who this character is with the textures turned off most of the time. At least not looking at the body. It's a little more obvious when you see those big eyes on his face. But most of the bodies are just kind of generic buff human male. Next up is Marvel vs. Capcom 3, which again is a really cool model, but this time, I don't know, the head looks maybe a little too small. I think the eyes are a little too big on this one. It looks a little strange to me, and I think he's a little too muscular this time around. Look at those thighs, Jesus. You can really tell this character is from a fighting game. 10,932 tries. Next up is the 3D model from The Amazing Spider-Man 2 Live Wallpaper for mobile phones. It looks fine. I think he looks a bit too scrawny now. I know I said this version was too muscular, but they went too far in the other direction. This guy just kind of looks like a wimp. Also, I think his spider logo blends in a little bit too much with the webbing here. It's not a whole lot different, but this definitely isn't one of my favorite models, personally. Now, this model is a lot different. This is from Disney Infinity 2.0, released in 2014. Obviously, a much different game than most of these other ones. It's like a sandboxy kids game with chibi-style characters. I think in the context of that game, this probably looked fine. I'm not a huge fan of the big bulging triceps and calves. But other than that, this looks okay. I think it's weird how thick his neck is compared to the rest of the body. His neck is almost the same width as his stomach. Next is the model from Marvel Contest of Champions, also released in 2014 for mobile phones. I like this random web just sticking out of the hand of this one. Another solid model. I feel like the spider logo really pops on this one compared to that one from that live wallpaper model from earlier. He's back to being super muscular again, but not too muscular like that Marvel vs. Capcom one. I think this is a surprisingly good model for a mobile phone game. 9,686 tries. Also, in case you were wondering, they reused the exact same model again in the Marvel Future Fight game that came out a year later. Next up is a model from Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite, and I think they sort of learned their lessons from the last game. He's muscular, but I don't think he's too muscular like he was before. I think he has a proper amount of muscle for a fighting game. The triangle count went up enormously, 37,864 triangles. That honestly seems like a little too much to me. I don't know if the triangle count needed to be quite that high. I doubt that in-game the performance hit would be worth it, but I know Infinite wasn't a lot of people's favorite Marvel vs. Capcom game, but maybe that's just me. Maybe you prefer your Spider-Man looking ultra detailed. It is kind of cool seeing those individual little fibers in his suit now. And the last model we have today is the model from Insomniac's Marvel's Spider-Man for the PS4. Now, I'm not sure if this is the exact model from the game because I wasn't able to find this on the modelsresource.com. I was only able to find it on Sketchfab. But if not the exact model, it sure looks pretty dang close. I'm inclined to believe that it is the right model because it says that it's 156,000 triangles, which seems like it would be pretty hard to model for just some random person. So I think this might actually be ripped from the game. But either way, it looks fantastic. I love that game, and I might be biased because of that, but I'm inclined to say that this is the best one. But if I had to pick an absolute favorite besides the PS4 version of the character, I think my personal favorite is probably this one from Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions. He's really bright and colorful. That spider logo really pops. I think he's one of the closest, if not the closest, to the original comic book design. It's got a high polygon count, but not too high. So I think I'm gonna go with that one. But what do you guys think? What was your favorite? Let me know in the comments. If you liked the video and made it this far, consider joining the Discord channel or Patreon. I'd really appreciate that. And as always, thanks for watching.